In this exercise, we will add a few more animated effects to our app using the React Animation Component library. As I've mentioned before, there are many third-party libraries that support adding animations to your React application. The ones that we're using this week are far from the only ones, so you can explore others on your own if you wish. To get started, go ahead and open your Bash terminal to your project folder and yarn add React Animation Components. We will also need to install another library called prop types. Then open home-component.js and let's import fade transform from React Animation Components. Fade transform will allow us to apply both fade and transform effects using the same component. We'll add this to the card component here. This in attribute is a boolean that tells the component to run this transition when being mounted. And this sets the transition from an initial scale of 50% to the normal value, so it's going to create kind of a pop effect. And I'll have it move a little bit vertically as well. You'll notice we need to use two sets of curly braces to create this object, because the first outer set of curly braces is needed to let us embed JavaScript inside JSX. So you can find information about how these and other attributes for fade transform work in the documentation for React Animation Props, which is linked in the additional resources. And I encourage you to read through it and play around with it a little. In fact, the code challenge after this exercise is going to have you do just that. But be aware that documentation for these third-party libraries are often not super informative and often not really geared toward beginners. You'll find that you can't always rely on having thorough documentation, so often you have to just try things out and figure things out on your own or ask for help. There are some projects like Bootstrap where the documentation is really great and really thorough, but it's just not going to be like that all the time. That said, let's go ahead and add the closing tag for this component, and let's check it out in the browser. So here's what that looks like. Again, I know it's not that subtle, but this is just for demonstration. You probably want to be a little more subtle on a real website. Let's do that again. Make sure that your home page is working in this way before you continue. Next, we'll update the campsite info component. Again, we'll need to import React Animation Components. And this time, we'll also import the fade and stagger components along with fade transform. Then we'll apply the same fade transform effect to the card component here in render campsite. And this will be exactly the same. You could even cut and paste it if you wanted. Then for our next trick, we'll use those stagger and fade components we imported down here where we render our comments. The stagger component works on a group of elements like the ones that we'll get from this map method. Make sure to give it a boolean attribute of in. Then we'll also apply a fade effect to each of the comments as they're rendered. And this one will need an in attribute as well. Then it's important to remember that the unique key that we set here must always go on the topmost element. So that's no longer this div, it's the fade component, and we need to move the key up. After this, we can test our app in the browser once again, and when you select a campsite from the directory, you should now see that same pop-out effect on the card. And you should also be able to see the comments stagger and fade in. Let's try it one more time. Once your project is working like this, you'll be finished with this exercise. You can make a commit if you're using Git and continue on to the next lesson.